Shalom everybody and welcome back for insights in the Parsha of the week, Parshat Chayei Sarah. And as usual, we want to give just a recap on some ideas from Rebbe Nachman's Likutey Moharan, lesson 24, and we're going to show Bezrat Hashem in an amazing way how they're connected into the Parsha of the week. So, in lesson 24, Rebbe Nachman speaks about the unbelievable power of doing a mitzvah with joy, and this propels a person forward, propels them up, to reaches the maximum level called the Keter. And of course, this is dependent on the person's ratzon, what he's looking for in life. If the person is looking to connect to God at the maximum level that he can, so this is what will happen. He will experience close proximity relationship, or whatever we want to call it, with the level of the Keter. And how the Keter works is that it bounces a person backwards. Why? Because if it does not do that, the intensity of the light contained behind the Keter, which is the infinite light of Hashem, will just nullify and disintegrate a person. He'll melt. He'll disappear. Because it's impossible for finite and infinite to be unified altogether and remain separate. So if a finite being, a finite existence, tries to run to connect to the infinite light, he'll be merged in the infinite light and disappear. Hashem doesn't want that. Hashem wants, while in a finite existence, to experience Hashem's godliness, to experience His light and His presence, which manifests especially in having breakthroughs and clarity in life's challenges, which Hashem sends a person specifically that he should turn to Hashem, turn to Him at the highest of levels that he can, and by doing so, allow for this light to come down to him. But for this light to come in a vessel that a person can manage and take with him, the Keter pushes a person back. Okay? In the Kabbalah, it's called mate vela mate, which means reaching and not reaching. On one hand, you connect, you experience the first-hand exposure to the Keter, but then it's taken away. You have a big light, but then it's like taken away from you, and while you're being bounced back, that's when you build vessels that within them the infinite light can shine into them. What does it shine? Clarity. The clarity in life as to what to do with all the frustrations and confusions that a person faces in their lifetime, with all the various challenges and tests. Because like Rebbe Nachman says, and the Torah says many times, that a man in this world is filled with non-stop tests. There's always another test, always. Because you're always meant to grow further and further, to grow up higher and higher through the tests. That's why Hashem is always sending a person challenges. Not to just, make you suffer and break you and push you away, but that you should use the challenge as a stepping stone to come closer to Him. But to do that, you need to access the infinite light. So that's why a person is being challenged to force him to go forward, to force him to do mitzvot b'simcha, to force him to go into the domain of simcha, and that way to connect to the Keter, but in the Keter's unique way of pushing a person back. Okay? This is a summary of what Rebbe Nachman says in lesson 24. Rav Nosson, in his Likutey Halachot, the laws of marriage, of marital relationships, called Ishut, discourse number 4, connects this in such an amazing way to the role of husband and wife. He says that the role of the wife, the woman, is the idea of the Keter. And it's hinted to in a verse from Mishlei, I think it's chapter 11, chapter 12, where the verse reads, Eshet Chayil Ateret Ba'alah. The woman of valor is the crown of her husband. As opposed to another famous verse that we say every Friday night, Eshet Chayil Mi Yimtza, which is found in the last chapter of Mishlei, I think it's chapter 32. This is an earlier verse, which has the same beginning, Eshet Chayil Ateret Ba'alah. So the idea is that Rav Nosson says, on one hand, a woman in marriage, she's the recipient. The man marries a woman with a ketubah, and in the ketubah, he has all these marital obligations. I will sustain you and nourish you and give you shelter, even if I have to take the shirt off of my back. So the man is giving obligation to sustain her, and the ketubah is what gives her that connection to the husband. So she's a receiver. He's the giver, he's the receiver. And when in that scenario, you get the impression that the husband is on a higher status than the wife, because he's the giver. He has what to give, and then he gives it over. So it's like a masculine attitude. So Rav Nosson writes, although normally the husband is on a higher level than the wife, and it's true, but in one sense, he writes, the woman has a higher soul root than the husband. In that, she's rooted in the Keter. Like the verse reads, Eshet Chayil, the wife of valor, is the crown of her husband. Atara and Keter are synonymous words. Ateret Ba'alah, the crown of her husband. Rav Nosson takes it quite literally. She's rooted in the Keter, which means what? And this may sound funny, but this is the whole scenario of why a man has many setbacks and obstacles in doing what he wants to do, mainly from his wife. That she doesn't let him to do what he'd like to do, and it's for his benefit. It's because she's there to enable the husband to have a proper balance. Since she's the Keter, and the role of the Keter is to put on the brakes when someone is running to go high, and try to connect to the infinite light, which on a practical level also when a person has high aspirations and he has ambitions and he's driving, even if it's a business deal to proceed of a business venture or a family setting or purchasing a house or doing things in life where the man has a lot of ambition and has aspirations and it might be too much for him to handle. So a woman has a type of spiritual antennas connected to the Keter, and she's there to put the brakes on the family, especially on the husband. That's the idea of the Keter. Because the Keter is there not to, oh, you're just causing me problems, what is this? No. The Keter is there to put the brakes on the man so that he doesn't overdo it. And by being pushed back and taking it the right way, he now builds vessels that within them he does reach infinite light, which is the clarity as to what to do without being overdrained and overexhausted and to blow up, God forbid. So Rav Nosson explains that this verse, Eshet Chayil Ateret Ba'alah, is the role of the wife. And in this sense, the woman is on a higher level. She's a receiver. She's below the husband in many senses, like we said, but she also is rooted in the Keter. Now, interestingly, the Midrash on this week's Parshah says a few times this verse, Eshet Chayil Ateret Ba'alah, on Sarah Imenu. The Midrash, when depicting the verse, we can look at the verse inside. In the beginning of the Parsha, right, it says that Avram came back from Kiryat Arba, Sarah passed away. But verse number 2, chapter 23, verse number 2. Vatamot Sarah b'Kiryat Arba hi Chevron be'eretz Canaan. And Sarah passed away in Kiryat Arba, which is Chevron, in the land of Canaan. Vayavo Avraham, because Avram was not there, he was in Beersheba. He went to Beersheba. So Vayavo Avraham came from Beersheba, lispod leSarah v'livkota, to eulogize, to mourn over Sarah and to cry over her. Okay? To cry over her. So on this verse, the Midrash says, Avram had a big loss because on Sarah it is said, Eshet Chayil Ateret Ba'alah. So what's interesting is take a look at the word v'livkota. In the Chumash, the word for and he cried over her, the kaf is small. Take a look, v'livkota, look in your Chumash, and you'll see that the kaf in the middle, the exact middle, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 letters. The fourth letter of this word, kaf, is small. Kaf ze'era, okay? Kaf, there's a rule, Rebbe Nachman quotes the Zohar, ein keter belo kaf. He says this in lesson number 6, for example, quoting the Zohar, that the letter kaf represents the idea of the keter. Because in order to connect to it, in order to receive from it, you have to be bent like the letter kaf. The letter kaf is bent. That's the only way that a person really can accept the light of the Keter, is that he bends to the pushbacks and the setbacks that are sent from the Keter for the person's benefit, and the person takes it properly. That's how he receives from the Keter. So the kaf here is small. Why is it small? Okay, and on Sarah we know the verse, the Midrash says that she's the crown of her husband. We see, by the way, before we go on, that the Torah does make mention of Sarah being on a higher level than Avraham Avinu in certain senses. In last week's Parsha, when Sarah told Avraham Avinu about Ishmael, Garesh et ha'amazot ve'et bena, kick out Hagar and her son Ishmael, kick her out. And Avram was hurt to hear that that his son went off the path to evil ways, Ishmael, and he didn't want to kick him out because Avraham Avinu is the way of Chesed. So Hashem told Avraham Avinu, Shma bekola, listen to the voice of Sarah, and Rashi says to her divine inspiration, Ruach HaKodesh. From here we learn that she was on a higher level of Ruach HaKodesh than Avraham Avinu. Okay, she was higher in divine spirit, meaning in certain realms, certain domains. Hashem is telling Avraham Avinu, this area you have to listen to her. But normally, the Midrash praises Sarah. The Gemara praises Sarah, that Sarah was such a dedicated wife. She so much respected Avraham Avinu. Even the Gemara says, she passed away, and she should have been buried immediately. But they waited to bury Sarah until Avraham Avinu came all the way from Beersheba to utilize her. So the Gemara goes into the question, burying a deceased member of the family. Is it the honor of the deceased or the honor for the living? If it's the honor for the living, so the living people, the living relatives would prefer that their deceased person be buried immediately. So it's honor for the people to bury that person immediately. When is it the honor for the deceased person? When there's an honor for him and how he's being eulogized and how the levaya is. So the Gemara concludes that for Sarah, seeing how much she respected her husband Avraham Avinu, she would have preferred to wait to be buried, which is a disgrace to the family technically, that the met is munach is placed outside like this and not being buried is a disgrace. She preferred that disgrace and instead have her husband, to wait for her husband to come to be a part of the eulogy and the levaya and the ceremony of the burial ceremony. Okay, so we see that Sarah was tremendously dedicated, devoted to Avraham Avinu. The Midrash goes into this a lot in Midrash Tanchuma on the Parshah, etc. But there's certain areas that she knew a bit better, and Hashem tells Avraham Avinu, you have to bend to her because she's rooted in the Keter, Eshet Chayil Ateret Ba'alah. Okay, so if this you can understand, the letter Kaf now is being diminished. Why is it being diminished? Because there's a thing here. What was happening? What caused the death of Sarah Imenu? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says on this verse that lispod leSarah veLivkota, that Avram came to eulogize Sarah and to cry over her. So Rashi points out v'nismecha mitat Sarah la'akedat Yitzchak. The Parshah juxtaposes the death of Sarah with the binding of Yitzchak, which is last week's Parsha Vayera, the end of the Parsha. Lefi she'al yedei besorat Akedah shenizdamen b'na le'shchita, because it was through being informed about the binding that her son was now being sent to be slaughtered. V'kimat shelo nishchat, and yet he was not to be slaughtered. So yes, slaughtered and not being slaughtered. From hearing this, from this combination of yes being slaughtered, that her son was being sent to being slaughtered, and the Midrash says in many places she was happy about it, that her son is going to be offered for Kiddush Hashem. She was happy about that. And then Kimat Shelo Nishchat, the commenters explain that if it's not going to be slaughtered, then he's been blemished and he's no longer a perfect person. There's a mum. So what's going to be with him? Parcha nishmata mimena umeta. So her soul departed and she passed away. The Baal HaTurim points out, why is the kaf small? To indicate that Avraham Avinu didn't really cry for her a lot. Why didn't he cry for her a lot? Because she was deserving to pass away because she caused it upon herself. That's what the Baal HaTurim says. So he cried a little, because the law is when someone, God forbid, commits suicide. We're not saying that she commits suicide, but it's a little aspect of it, the Baal HaTurim says. But once someone can commit suicide, we don't mourn that person a lot because what they did was terrible. They weren't supposed to commit suicide. People think, oh, there's no other option, only suicide. No, there's another option, but you're stubborn in whatever you're going through, and you don't fall through. And that's why people, God forbid, they commit suicide. They have blockages. This is a class in itself. We won't go into that much, but that because of that, there wasn't a lot of crying. But the question is, so why the letter Kaf? Take another letter to prove that, Mr. Baal HaTurim, Rabbi Baal HaTurim. Take another letter. Why the Kaf? This indicates something unbelievable. We said the idea of the wife, Rav Nosson said, is to be like the Keter. The Keter has this faculty of mate vela mate, of allowing a person to advance and yet stopping them. Okay? Sarah was the master of doing that for Avraham Avinu, her husband. And like we saw, that she was able to prevent him. He was feeling bad about Ishmael, but she says, no, you got to kick him out. And Hashem says, listen to Sarah. And that's an example of many other times that we're not told about in the Torah. But that's the idea of the role of the woman, to put on the breakers so that the husband doesn't override and explode, God forbid, and just pass out spiritually. So Sarah's role was to influence mate vela mate. Now, what happened was Yitzchak, his job, Yitzchak, is now to portray the same idea as Sarah. So the Rashi is very specific in how he says it, that when she heard that Yitzchak, he was now about to be slaughtered, v'kimat shelo nishchat, that's the idea also of running, reaching, and running back, not reaching. Mate vela mate. To be shechted would mean that Yitzchak would be nullified and included in the infinite light. And yet it was stopped. V'lo nishchat. So she saw that now Yitzchak is going to play the role of being the Keter. Rebbe Nachman indicates this amazing connection also in lesson 24 between Yitzchak and the idea of the Keter associated with Yitzchak Avinu. So once she saw that now he's ready for this job, she's no longer needed to give that over to Avraham Avinu, because now the son will do that job. So that's why Parcha Nishmata, she took off with a consolation that now there's a son, Yitzchak, who on the one hand, he's called Yitzchak because of the tzchok, the happiness and joy that was in the world when Yitzchak was born, when Sarah was conceived and Yitzchak was born. Rashi pointed out last week's Parshah, there was a lot of simcha in the world when Yitzchak was born. Many barren women gave birth, she was able to nurse many children, many sick people were healed. There was a lot of joy in the world at the time. And yet Yitzchak also is called gvurot, severities, because he has that balance of being severe in judgment, but he's also out of simcha. So in a way also, it's considered a bounce of running, which is light, happiness, and simcha, and yet a refrainment. When Sarah saw that the son now is doing that role, Parcha Nishmata. It says in many places, the whole story of how Sarah passed away is not so clear. There's many opinions. Many opinions say in the Midrash Gemara that she passed away out of simcha. When she heard that her son was about to be slaughtered, this whole thing, and that he entered this new stage in his life, so she, out of happiness, left this world. And that's why Avraham Avinu didn't cry that much. It wasn't necessary, because there was something positive happening now, that now, by her leaving her role of being Eshet Chayil Ateret Ba'alah, the crown of her husband, leaving room for Yitzchak, so there was not such a necessity to cry that much. And that's why it seems the letter Kaf, which indicates the Keter, is small in Avraham Avinu's crying, because it wasn't really crying. It was crying and a consolation. There's no need to cry because something good is about to happen, which is what? The development of Yitzchak to become Yitzchak Avinu. It says, it's amazing, that Yitzchak Avinu, even though he wasn't slaughtered, still there's a Midrash or Zohar that says this, that Yitzchak Avinu was taken up to heaven because his ratzon, his will to be slaughtered was so strong, it was considered as if, even like Rashi points out, that Avraham Avinu, when he slaughtered the seh, that was stuck, the horns were stuck in the branches, and he offered him instead of Yitzchak. So if you see in last week's Parsha and Rashi, Avraham Avinu said, after every stage of slaughtering and preparing the animal, he said, Yirat son, this should be as if it was done on my son Yitzchak. As if this was done, as if he was hufshat, he was skinned, as if now he was cut up and offered on the altar. All this as if. It shows that Yitzchak's ratzon, his will to do this, was so powerful. The Zohar says he actually went up for a time. And what's the proof that we know that he was up there? Is that when, in Parshat Toldot, when Yitzchak Avinu's eyes were blinded, and Rivka dressed up Yaakov Avinu with the garments of that were from Nimrod, the special garments that made him furry and hairy. So when Yitzchak kissed and smelled the fragrance of Yaakov, he said, behold, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that was blessed by Hashem. And Rashi says like the field of apples, but from the Garden of Eden. Like a smell from Gan Eden. The question is, how does Yitzchak Avinu know what the smell of Gan Eden is? So the Zohar says, because he was actually up there for a time after the Akedah, because of his ratzon to do it, so they actually let him go up and come back down. That's how we had an experience of this knowing what the smell of Gan Eden is. But the point is that Yitzchak now fulfilled the job of being like an Eshet Chayil Ateret Ba'alah, the idea of being the crown. He's now a crown. We won't go so much into this, but the Zohar says that Yitzchak had a feminine neshama, which fits into the idea of Eshet Chayil, that he was a woman of valor, but he had a neshama of a feminine neshama, even though he was a man. Okay, but so that fits in on the idea of the verse of Eshet Chayil Ateret Ba'alah, even on Yitzchak Avinu. So what comes out of all this is many points. The idea that how a man, yes, should respect the wife, and she should know her place, but the man also should know there are times where the woman's job is to be the Keter. She's there to help a man, and the setbacks and obstacles that a man faces is only to allow him to draw in the light of the Keter in proportion without being exposed overly. And that's what the Keter does, pushing a person back, which is also one of the things that a woman does in preventing her husband in whatever he's trying to do to achieve his aspirations. So, Shabbat Shalom, and Bezat Hashem, we should learn a lot of lessons on Shalom Bayit from this week's Parshah. All the best.